Host of Way Too Early, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire. MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle is with us, and President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. He's the author of the weekly newsletter, Home and Away, available on Substack, and Chief White House Correspondent for The New York Times, Peter Baker, is with us here in Washington. And we begin this morning with another snapshot on the presidential race. A new poll from Reuters and Ipsos finds Vice President Kamala Harris with a lead over former President Donald Trump. In the survey, Harris leads Trump by 6 points, 50% to 44% among likely voters. That's within the margin of error. She also leads by 7 points among registered voters, a 2-point increase from her lead in a poll conducted earlier this month. An NBC News poll released earlier this week also showed Harris leading Trump by 5 points, 49% to 44%. Willie.
Yeah, it's one of those pick your polls. There's another poll yesterday, Quinnipiac, that had it tied head-to-head. So I think most people inside the Harris campaign even don't believe it's a 7-point margin, but perhaps that they have now pulled ahead a bit, and probably for things like this. Donald Trump saying again, migrants are taking over American towns. He says they're now using weapons so sophisticated our military hasn't even seen them before. During a speech yesterday in Savannah, Georgia, that ostensibly was about the economy, Trump continued to demonize migrants in Colorado and Ohio.
Criminal havoc throughout the country. Aurora, Colorado, you saw that, where Venezuelan gangs are taking over real estate. They become real estate developers. How nice. No, they're taking over real estate, and they have weapons that even our military hasn't seen. In Springfield, Ohio, so you have a town of 50,000 people. They have 32,000 migrants put into the town almost overnight. And the people are so nice. You know, they want to be nice. They say, well, the mayor is actually looking for interpreters. He's looking all over for interpreters because they can't understand. The language is totally different. What the hell? I'm sorry. You have to move the people back to the country from which they came.
So, Peter Baker, let's remind people the Haitian immigrants he's talking about in Springfield, Ohio, are here legally under temporary protected status. So he's talking about legal immigrants being deported and removed from the country, inflating the number of Haitian immigrants that have arrived in Springfield over the last 7 years by about double. But this is obviously a strategy. This is not a mistake that an economic speech became a rant against immigrants.
It's all about immigration. You know, I've been going back really lately and watching a lot of Trump rallies from the last 6-7 months, and it's really a one-issue campaign. That's the thing that strikes you. You know, a Trump speech, whether it's about the economy, whether it's about foreign policy, whether it's about anything, is really all about immigration. It's, you know, immigration, 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 inflation, immigration, crime, immigration. It's just, you know, he comes back to it again and again and again. It's really what informs his whole campaign. It's what motivates him, animates him. He thinks he won in 2016 on the wall. He's trying to replicate that 8 years later, and it's you know, it's not a surprise, I suppose, but it is a very narrow argument that he's making, because a lot of people actually would like to hear some more thoughtful conversation about the economy. And of course, he's just going to talk about Springfield, Ohio, and Aurora, Colorado, the two places he's most fixated on.
And in that same campaign event in Savannah, Trump once again undermined America's position supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia.
I will prevent World War III, and you are very close to World War III. Biden and Kamala got us into this war in Ukraine, and now they can't get us out. They can't get us out. I watched him. We will win. We will. He's been saying that for 3 years. Every time Zelensky comes to the United States, he walks away with $100 billion. I think he's the greatest salesman on earth. But we're stuck in that war unless I'm president. I'll get it done. I'll get it negotiated. I'll get out. We got to get out. Biden says, we will not leave until we win. What happens if they win? That's what they do, is they fight wars. As somebody told me the other day, they beat Hitler. They beat Napoleon. That's what they do. They fight. And it's not pleasant.
Okay. Richard Haass, I'll let you take this one. There's
Gee, thanks.
I'd say you're so welcome. But is this, again, who is this for? Because I would say globally, it's shocking and frightening for our allies and friends. And in terms of trying to move people in swing states, is this where they are? Is he tapping into something?
Well, he is tapping into something, Mika. It's one of the long traditions in America, and it's the tradition of American isolationism. That what happens over there doesn't matter. It's not worth it. It's simply cost. It takes resources away from what should be spent here. So that's essentially the tradition he's tapping into. We saw it before World War II. We've seen it periodically at other times. It's come back with surprising intensity there. Two things. One, when he talks about Russia and he talks about Napoleon Hitler, the difference, rather fundamental difference, that's when Russia was invaded. That's when Russia was on the defense. Russia now is fighting an offensive war of aggression. Rather minor detail, so it's much harder for Putin to do what Stalin did and appeal to, if you will, Mother Russia. That said, I will say Trump, it's not in his defense, but I'll just say he makes one decent point. And it's the question of what do we mean by winning in Ukraine? It came up in the debate. It came up yesterday. It came up in President Biden's speech. It came up with what President Zelensky said. No one is putting on the table what is an achievable goal in Ukraine? If victory continues to be defined, it is by many, Mika, that Ukraine has to totally rid its country of every Russian troop. And I understand the argument for doing it. The problem is it's not achievable. No one is putting out there what is a realistic plan for victory. If we're going to spend all this money, what is our return on investment? And that's a conversation that this administration has been reluctant to have now for 2.5 years. And the danger of not having that conversation, not giving Americans an achievable policy, strategy in Ukraine, is it allows someone like Donald Trump to come into the conversation and say, this can't work, I'll just end it, and so forth. So I think the administration and I think the Ukrainian government have to begin to fill the space and explain what is an achievable strategy in that country.
First of all, I was struck by the two clips we just played there from Trump. First about the migrants and then about Ukraine, how every word was a lie. Like every word was a lie. There's not even a pretense of a truth there, the way he depicted all of these scenes. But picking up the point on Ukraine, Mike, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, will be speaking at the UN today. He's meeting with President Biden and Vice President Harris tomorrow in Washington. He's supposed to present a victory plan, details of which are a little bit unclear, other than we know there'll be pressure for the U.S. to allow Ukraine to use U.S.-made weapons deep inside Russia, which at this point the administration has been cautious about. But as Richard said, for now anyway, Kyiv wants to regain its entire borders, its original borders. A noble goal, but one that seemingly is unrealistic. There's no talk of diplomacy here. But as we heard from President Biden yesterday and then Donald Trump, such contrasting views of the future of an issue that's going to affect the entire globe.
Well, here's the situation, I would think. No one in the United States and no one in Ukraine, really, at least to my knowledge, has defined the word victory. What does victory mean in Ukraine? We don't know. What we do know is Russia has suffered enormous casualties. I don't think we can get a grip on the number of casualties that Russia has suffered, both internally, economically, but in the population itself. Ukraine, on the other hand, has fought nobly. They are the underdog still, but they've got to define in Washington and in this feckless institution, the United Nations down the street, they've got to define what victory means, I would think.
100%. And again, the refusal to do it. I understand the principle. No one ought to be able to acquire an inch of territory by force. But Ukraine is only a third of Russia's population. Russia has this massive military helped by North Korea, Iran, and China. So, again, we need to have goals in foreign policy that are not just desirable and principled. They've also got to be doable. They've got to be achievable. Otherwise, you'll have the Donald Trumps of the world saying you're throwing good money after bad. You're wasting money. So that's why I think this debate, the Friends of Ukraine have to reframe this debate in a way that promises an achievable goal in a reasonable amount of time.
And maybe President Zelensky will begin to make that case today during his speech at the UN. And we know he has said when he visits the White House and President Biden tomorrow, he will present what he's calling a victory plan. So to your point, Richard. So Zelensky speaks today. Yesterday, President Biden spoke at the UN in what will be his final address as president to the United Nations General Assembly. It was a wide-ranging speech highlighting the threats to international alliances, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and, of course, the escalating conflict in the Middle East.
There'll always be forces that pull our countries apart and the world apart. Aggression, extremism, chaos, and cynicism. A desire to retreat from the world and go it alone. Our task, our test, is to make sure that the forces holding us together are stronger than those that are pulling us apart. That the principles of partnership that we came here each year to uphold can withstand the challenges. That the center holds once again. My fellow leaders, I truly believe we're at another inflection point in world history. For the choices we make today will determine our future for decades to come. Will we stand behind the principles that unite us? Will we stand firm against aggression? Will we end the conflicts that are raging today? Will we take on global challenges like climate change, hunger, and disease? Will we plan now for the opportunities and risk of a revolutionary new technologies? Putin's war has failed, and at his core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free. He set out to weaken NATO, but NATO is bigger, stronger, and more united than ever before, with 2 new members, Finland and Sweden. But we cannot let up. The world now has another choice to make. Will we sustain our support to help Ukraine win this war and preserve its freedom, or walk away and let aggression be renewed and a nation be destroyed? I know my answer. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away. And we will not let up on our support for Ukraine, not until Ukraine wins a just and durable peace in the UN Charter. As we look ahead, we must also address the rise of violence against innocent Palestinians on the West Bank and set the conditions for a better future, including a 2-state solution where the world, where Israel enjoys security and peace and full recognition and normalized relations with all its neighbors, where Palestinians live in security, dignity, and self-determination in a state of their own.
So Peter Baker, touching on all the hot points, the flashpoints around the world right now, but also in a moment that probably the speech will be remembered for, President Biden talking about his decision to step aside and not run for a second term, said it was a very difficult decision after 50 years in public service. He said, I love this job, but I love my country more. And in a message that could have been either directed at the people in the room or perhaps to the Republican candidate for president right now, he said, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people that matter the most.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting that some of the people in that room, of course, have had power for an awful long time and don't plan to give it up anytime soon. So, in effect, he's offering himself as a model for how it ought to be done. But you're right, Willie, to say that that's something he may also be targeting at a domestic audience. That is to say, his predecessor and would-be successor who refused to give up power after losing in 2020 and made up claims that weren't true about the election and had a mob attack the Capitol. And it's rather striking that an American president would be having to make that point about an American, democratic